The heavy metal spade slammed down violently against the ancient stone. Dirt and vibrant green fragments exploded across the pristine marble floor of the VIP greenhouse. Chloe fell to her trembling knees. Her hands desperately tried to scoop up the shattered remains of her thermal moss terrarium. This was a heritage breed of moss she had spent months painstakingly cultivating. "You actually call this garbage a biological breakthrough?" Vance sneered. The nursery director towered over her, with a look of absolute, unfiltered disgust. He intentionally stomped his heavy leather boot right onto the fragile glass casing. The glass shattered loudly, echoing through the massive room. Then, he viciously kicked her metal leg brace. Chloe winced in sharp pain, but bit her lip hard to keep from crying out. "A crippled orphan playing in the dirt doesn't belong in my multi-million-dollar eco-facility," he spat. He grabbed her thin winter jacket and shoved her roughly toward the loading dock doors. Outside, a brutal winter storm was already howling viciously through the dark mountains. "Get out of my sight before I have security throw you into the snow," he demanded. Chloe dragged her stiff, aching leg as she was forced out into the freezing wind. Vance laughed loudly as the heavy steel doors slammed shut behind her. He thought he had just eliminated the only person who knew his project was a total fraud. But he was completely and utterly wrong. He had no idea that a quiet man in a faded maintenance uniform was watching from the shadows of the thermal drying room. He had no idea that his $30 million sustainable architecture project was about to be frozen completely. And he certainly didn't know that it would soon be permanently transferred to the very girl he just threw into the blizzard. If you want to see how a cruel tyrant gets exactly what he deserves, hit that subscribe button right now. Join us to witness a journey of taking back dignity and finding a radiant, sweet happiness. To understand why Chloe didn't fight back immediately, you have to understand what she was carrying. Chloe lived with a constant, suffocating fear of the dark and howling winds. Years ago, a horrific wildfire had trapped her deep in the wilderness. She had dragged a trapped hiker out of the blazing woods in the dead of night. She bravely saved a life, but a falling, burning branch crushed her leg. The severe trauma left her with a permanent limp and intense PTSD from storms. Despite the pain, she possessed a naturally charismatic and inspiring positivity that drew people to her. She never feared failure, viewing every single setback as a stepping stone to personal growth. She spent her days meticulously scavenging bamboo roots and cultivating rustic stone moss. She even loved growing organic vegetables and raising small fish in her modest backyard, constantly nurturing life. She was an incredibly fast learner, mastering the complex biology of natural thermal insulation all on her own. She didn't just dream of success. She had a rich mindset, actively building towards financial freedom. She was a woman of her word, always matching her actions to her promises. She wasn't doing this for fame or a massive corporate payout. She was doing it to pay for oxygen tanks and medication for her ailing grandmother. Her grandmother suffered from severe black lung disease. After decades working in the dusty stone quarries, every penny Chloe earned was a literal breath of life for the only family she had left. But Vance knew about her desperate situation and ruthlessly weaponized it against her. For 3 agonizing months, he had completely refused to pay her wages. He forced her to work grueling overtime in the freezing nursery, while he sat in his heated office. He constantly humiliated her in front of the wealthy, elite clients. He called her a broken charity case who should be grateful he even let her sweep the floors. He stole her brilliant research notes and submitted them to the board of directors under his own name. If you stand on the side of simple, rustic courage and kindness, please leave this exact prayer in the comments below. I choose the courage to plant good seeds for an eternal warm harvest from the highest God. While Vance was busy celebrating his stolen genius, the true owner of the eco-chain was already on the premises. Edward was a notoriously reclusive billionaire who valued hard work over empty words. He owned the entire global network of clean ecological real estate and Aurora thermal cabins. He despised corporate red tape and always preferred to inspect his facilities in disguise. Today, he was dressed as a low-level electrical contractor. He had brought his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, along for the secret trip. Lily hadn't spoken a single word since her mother passed away 3 years ago in a tragic accident. Edward was desperately searching for the perfect biological thermal moss to line the walls of a special healing cabin he was building for her. He had been quietly observing the nursery all week long. He saw exactly who actually did the heavy lifting and who was faking it. He saw Chloe gently singing to the plants while she worked tirelessly, and he saw Vance sitting in his expensive leather chair, screaming lazily at his phone. On the afternoon of the massive storm, Edward left Lily safely in the VIP viewing lounge. He went down to check the basement generators, trusting the staff to keep watch. Vance was explicitly supposed to be watching the lounge area, but Vance had sneaked off to the underground wine cellar to drink with a wealthy investor. The mountain winds suddenly shifted, transforming into a violent, blinding blizzard. The temperature plummeted to dangerous extremes within mere minutes. Then, a massive, terrifying crack echoed through the entire valley. An unexpected avalanche of snow and ice cascaded down the mountain slope, directly toward the VIP greenhouse. The reinforced glass roof groaned agonizingly under the immense, crushing pressure. Then it shattered completely. Freezing snow and razor-sharp ice poured into the luxurious lounge, where little Lily was sitting completely alone. The sudden, violent impact immediately knocked out the main power grid. The entire facility was plunged into absolute, terrifying darkness. Outside in the freezing cold, Chloe was trying to start her old beat-up truck when she heard the glass shatter. She looked back and saw the avalanche bury the front half of the massive building. Her chest tightened painfully as a massive panic attack hit her system. The howling wind sounded exactly like the roaring fire from her worst nightmares. The darkness felt like a physical weight, pressing down heavily on her lungs. Every survival instinct in her body screamed at her to drive away and save herself. But she remembered, seeing a little girl in a pink coat sitting in that lounge earlier today. She knew Vance was nowhere near that room, completely abandoning his post. Without a second thought, Chloe forced her trembling, damaged leg out of the truck. She grabbed her emergency thermal supply bag and limped heavily toward the ruined greenhouse. The wind screamed through the jagged, broken glass of the greenhouse roof. It felt like 1,000 icy needles, piercing Chloe's skin. Every single step on her damaged leg sent blinding shocks of pain up her spine. The heavy metal brace was practically freezing to her jeans. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The darkness inside the ruined lounge was absolute, triggering the deepest, darkest corners of her PTSD. Her breathing turned into short, rapid gasps. The smell of frozen earth and shattered marble reminded her too much of that burning forest years ago. She forced herself to crawl over the massive mounds of snow and debris. "Lily," she called out, her voice barely a whisper against the howling blizzard. Then, she heard it, a tiny, terrified whimper, coming from beneath a collapsed decorative pillar. Chloe dug frantically, with her bare, freezing hands. The ice tore at her fingernails. But she didn't care. She finally reached the little girl, who was curled up in a tight, shivering ball. Lily's lips were already turning a dangerous shade of blue. The sudden drop in temperature was causing rapid hypothermia. Chloe immediately ripped open her emergency bag. She pulled out the thick, woven mats of her rustic stone moss. This wasn't just any plant. She had engineered it to trigger a rapid exothermic reaction when crushed and mixed with specific organic salts she kept in her kit. She quickly activated the moss and wrapped it tightly around the little girl, securing it with her own thin jacket. Within seconds, a deep, radiating heat began to pulse from the organic blanket. Chloe pulled Lily tightly against her chest, rocking her gently in the freezing darkness. "I've got you," Chloe whispered, her teeth chattering violently. "You're safe. We're going to be okay." Lily, who hadn't made a sound in 3 years, buried her face in Chloe's neck and let out a soft, relieved sob. What Chloe didn't know was that they weren't alone in the dark. Down in the lower access tunnels, Edward had felt the massive impact of the avalanche. He had immediately rushed up the maintenance stairs, his heart pounding out of his chest. When he saw the completely destroyed lounge, sheer panic gripped him. He pulled out his heavy-duty infrared emergency camera to scan the pitch-black wreckage, and that's when he saw it, a glowing, bright red and orange thermal signature. In the middle of the freezing blue wasteland, through the lens, he watched a limping, freezing young woman. Shielding his precious daughter, he watched her sacrifice her own warmth, risking her own life, using a brilliant biological invention to keep his child alive. He also scanned the rest of the facility. Vance, the man who was supposed to be guarding the VIP area, was nowhere to be found. Edward's fear instantly morphed into a cold, calculated rage. He didn't interrupt the moment. He silently recorded everything on the camera's hard drive. His jaw clenched tight. It took another hour for the emergency response teams to finally cut through the blocked roads. Paramedics rushed in with heavy floodlights and thermal stretchers. They carefully pulled Chloe and Lily out of the rubble. The medics were absolutely stunned. They couldn't understand how the little girl had survived the freezing temperatures without a single trace of frostbite. Chloe, exhausted and barely conscious, was placed on a cot in the main lobby, which was now running on emergency generators. That's when Vance finally decided to show his face. He strutted into the lobby, smelling faintly of expensive wine, looking completely untouched by the disaster. He had quickly realized the magnitude of the situation and saw a golden opportunity. Several high-ranking executives from the parent company had arrived with the rescue choppers. Vance marched right up to them, holding a pristine clipboard. "Gentlemen, a terrible tragedy almost occurred tonight," Vance announced loudly, making sure everyone in the lobby could hear him. "But thanks to my quick thinking and my revolutionary thermal moss prototype, the child was saved." He pointed a manicured finger at the moss blanket, still wrapped around Lily. "I rushed into the debris and deployed my invention just in time. It's a complete success." Chloe tried to sit up, her voice raspy and weak. "That's a lie. You weren't even there. You threw me out." Vance rolled his eyes dramatically and laughed in a condescending tone. "Please, someone get this delusional, crippled girl to a hospital. She's clearly hallucinating from the cold. She's just a bitter, fired janitor." He turned back to the executives with a sickeningly sweet smile. "Now, about my $30 million funding for the next quarter. Your funding is permanently canceled, Vance." The voice was calm, but it cut through the room like a razor blade. Everyone turned to see the quiet, dirty electrical contractor step out of the shadows. Vance sneered, stepping forward aggressively. "Who the hell do you think you are, talking to me like that? Security, get this filthy maintenance guy out of here." The executives didn't move. In fact, they all suddenly stood up incredibly straight, their faces draining of color. Edward slowly took off his stained work cap and wiped the grease from his cheek. He pulled a small, sleek remote from his pocket and pointed it at the lobby's massive presentation screen. "I am the man who signs your paychecks," Edward said softly, "and the man whose daughter you completely abandoned to die in the snow." The screen flickered to life. It played the crystal-clear infrared footage. It showed the exact moment the avalanche hit. It showed Vance's post, completely empty. And then, it showed a limping, freezing girl, crawling through the deadly ice to save a child she didn't even know. The entire lobby went dead silent. Vance's face turned ash-white. His arrogant smile completely melted away, replaced by absolute, undeniable terror. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no words came out. "You didn't just steal her work," Edward said, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "You stole her dignity. You withheld her wages. And you tried to take credit for her incredible bravery." Edward walked right up to Vance, towering over the shaking director. "You're fired. Effective immediately. But it doesn't stop there." Edward nodded to the two large security officers standing by the door. "The authorities have already been called. You're going to prison for child endangerment, corporate fraud, and extreme labor exploitation. I will personally make sure you lose every single dime you have ever made." Vance fell to his knees, his hands trembling violently. He tried to beg, he tried to cry. But the security guards grabbed him by the arms and dragged him out the front doors, the very doors he had thrown Chloe out of just hours before. Edward then turned his attention away from the garbage and walked over to the cot where Chloe was resting. The cold, intimidating billionaire softened completely. He knelt down gently beside her, matching her eye level. Little Lily was sitting right next to Chloe, holding her dirty hand tightly. "Chloe," Edward said, his voice thick with genuine emotion, "I can never repay you for what you did tonight. You saved my entire world." He looked at the remarkable thermal moss blanket. "Your brilliance, your resilience. It's exactly what this company needs. If you'll accept it, I want you to take over as the Chief Director of Ecological Development. The $30 million project is yours, fully funded, and your grandmother will have the best medical care in the country. Starting tonight." Chloe looked at him, tears finally spilling hot down her freezing cheeks. She didn't need to say a word. Her bright, hopeful smile said everything. "If that beautiful rustic moss has turned into a sparkling masterpiece of justice for you today, please drop this prayer in the comments below to celebrate with us. I choose the courage to plant good seeds for an eternal warm harvest from the highest God." 6 months later, the dark, freezing memories of that night were completely gone. Chloe was no longer the struggling, bullied orphan limping through the mud. She stood inside a massive, brilliantly lit greenhouse, surrounded by lush, thriving, warm ecosystems. Her grandmother was sitting comfortably in a heated chair nearby, breathing easily, smiling proudly at her granddaughter. And standing right beside Chloe was Edward. He wasn't her boss anymore. He was her partner. As he gently slid a beautiful, custom-made emerald ring onto her finger, Lily ran up and hugged them both. "I love you, Mom," the little girl whispered. Finding her voice for the first time in years, Chloe hugged her tightly, surrounded by the warm, glowing light of the sunset. When we give away our simple, courageous warmth to others in the darkest storms, God always prepares the strongest, most beautiful safe harbor for us in the end. Hit that subscribe button right now to keep the warmth going. And I'll see you in the next story.